The older generations have failed tackling the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced.
Save our planet! Save our planet! Save our planet! Climate justice! When do we want it? Listen! We want a march! We want a march! We want a march! We want a march! Save our planet! Save our planet! Save our planet! Save our...
Over 1 million school children around the world went on strike March 15, 2019, to demand more ambitious action on climate change. From Australia to Sri Lanka, the United States to Nigeria, organizers of the Youth for Climate March reported that over 2,000 protests occurred in over 150 countries worldwide. The marches were inspired by 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teenager who has stood outside her country's parliament every Friday since August of 2018 in protest of the government's inaction on climate reform. The Youth Strike for Climate protests demonstrate a growing pattern of grassroots youth activism related to climate change. It's their future, their planet, and they're taking the stand that generations before them failed to take.
If we look at climate change, we've noticed that as we put in greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we've been warming the atmosphere. And the key thing is that the greenhouse gases keep the actual world relatively warm and therefore good for life. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've been pumping more into the atmosphere due to industrialization, due to power generation, due to deforestation, and that's starting to up the temperature. The Industrial Revolution was invented in the Midlands here in Britain, and so therefore we have that legacy of how much we put into the atmosphere.
As the first country to pass legislation, the United Kingdom has been the front runner in addressing the issue of climate change. The Climate Change Act, enacted in 2008, created the nation's framework for tackling climate change by reducing emissions of greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050. 174 countries and the European Union signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, following the example the UK set 8 years prior, by implementing efforts to reduce our global carbon footprint. But for youth activists, it comes late and not quickly enough. Inaction Fuels recently inspired protesters to demand more be done to ensure the livelihood of their generation and the future of the next.
The school strikes, I think, is incredibly important because it says, we're the next generation. Your policies, what you do now, will affect the young people and their children, and they'll have to pick up the legacy and deal with the mess that we've created. And what they're saying is, I'm sorry, this is so important. The science is very clear. You need to change the policies now, otherwise the next generation will not forgive you.
UK protesters are demanding the following: a declaration of a climate emergency, education reform that includes ecological crisis curriculum, better communication between the government and the public about the severity of climate change, and for the voting age to be lowered to 16. That's just a start.
We come every Friday. Our goal is basically to put pressure on the UK government to uphold their commitments to the Paris Climate Accords. I think it was last Wednesday they declared a climate emergency, which is a great first step, but it's a non-binding resolution, so we're kind of hoping they'll take things a bit more seriously with that as the first step.
When I went to the first strike in February, it was just so amazing. I mean, everyone came together for one reason, and we're quite divided at the moment because of Brexit and because of everything like that. So I think for young people all to come together, no matter your political background, your status, your working class, middle class, upper class, no matter your sexual orientation or race, we all came together and were fighting for the same thing, which was absolutely amazing.
Young people today that have a right to a future, have a right to a safe climate, and our voice matters. We can make an impact by joining the school strikes, by talking to politicians, talking to people around us.
I think we've got the platform we need, and I think now the government needs to take into their own hands to fix it.
That platform includes organizations and movements specific to climate change, like the UK Student Climate Network and Extinction Rebellion. The UK Student Climate Network is a network of students striving for climate justice in response to the global ecological crisis. Extinction Rebellion uses nonviolent resistance to protest against imminent ecological collapse and the risk of human extinction.
I've joined UK Student Climate Network which is the network which has organised the strikes across the UK. I am an organiser and I'm a working group organiser as well, meaning, so a working group is a section of people who focus on a particular topic. So we've got a graphics working group, an art working group and a legal working group and many more. I do posting and advertisement, so we try and get the word out there and everything like that. I think there are around maybe 100 students involved. There's a lot. I was also a part of Extinction Rebellion Youth for a little bit of time, which was amazing.
The most interesting thing is Extinction Rebellion and the other protests like the school strikes are not going away. So therefore, this is the people holding the politicians to account. And therefore, what's going to happen is everybody thinks, oh yeah, we voted on it, yeah, there'll be some new policies, etc. And then a couple of months later, Extinction Rebellion will come out and go, here's another disruption in a major city. You haven't done what you said you're going to.
For student protesters, the biggest issue they face is simply convincing people, especially politicians, of the gravity of climate change. But activism doesn't just manifest in nonviolent protest. For some, it can be done through educating others of the cause, a cause relevant to everyone. In England, climate change is supposed to be a part of science curriculum taught up to the age of 16. But students claim the current curriculum does not cover the climate crisis to the extent it has reached today.
Schools definitely need to change about climate change. They do not teach at all. All we learn about is fossil fuels and global warming, that's it, in geography. We learn about smog saying it was bad, but why is it bad? What will it impact? That's what we need to learn.
Lucy Gibbons, Rasha Oal-Soliman, Camilla Chamcham, and Izzy Lewis are students at the Cheney School in Oxford. The four budding environmental activists decided to strive for change in a different way. 3 months ago, the 15-year-olds started a petition to get climate change on the national curriculum, directed at Damon Hinds, the current Secretary of State for Education, and Amanda Spielman, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Education. The petition is less than 3,000 signatures away from its goal of 75,000.
We were looking at our school and just more broadly schools in general, and the upcoming climate strikes that were happening at that moment. And we were just looking at how little people of our age actually knew about it, and how some of them were just striking because of the name climate change, and they were like, okay, this seems like something important, so we should probably strike. And then we thought we want this to be more included in schools so that everyone can have the opportunity to actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, and because of all these things, we just decided that it was something that we needed to do, to get a petition and start things moving in the education system.
We want to subjects to include things that young people can do, not just a science behind the climate change and how it's caused. We want solutions of how to prevent it in the future.
We wanted for not just students but also teachers to understand it, because there's many teachers that don't actually understand the science, but also the social, political and economic things that come behind that as well. How broadly it encompasses everything. It's included in every single subject. There's no point learning if there's nothing to fight for.
Now, what would be exciting is if that could actually move to other countries. If you could have this uprising of the youth in, say, America, in China, in India, if you had that groundswell of the new generation going, do not do this in our name, because we're going to ones to have to actually inherit this mess, clean it up before we get there, that would be fantastic. So I think, particularly with social media, the power of communication across the globe, that is possible.
I think climate change will always be a part of my life. I'm 15 now and it's probably the biggest thing in my life, so I don't see why it wouldn't change in the future. I would always find the passion to make a change no matter what age group it was, but I think for a lot of other people they don't have that confidence and they need that support, which I think is amazing about the strikes, how we're all young and we're all ready to make a change.
Also the images of countries and villages going underneath water and mass forest fires that are just taking place, that is kind of heartbreaking. But to think if you have children, that could be what they're living in. The next generation, even us, just to grow up when we're 40 and just being surrounded by water, which is such a scary feeling, and if we don't change, then that's the way it's going to be.
We want better futures for younger generation. I think we should be like role models for them.
It matters because it's everything that we have. We live on the planet, we live here together, and that's why the environment matters, I guess.
The UK has the perfect opportunity to advance climate action. As the 5th richest country in the world, the nation already has a law in place to reduce carbon emissions. Protesters and school strikes are influencing further efforts in that agenda, and both parties have been politically responsive, with Parliament recently voting to affirm that we face both a climate and an environmental emergency.
We have the technology, we have the approaches, we have the policies. What we have to do is have the political will and the understanding of the issue to make sure we can move forward. I think we are at a pivotal time in history because this is the first time whereby the youth have said, I'm sorry. I'm standing up and being counted and saying, this is where it stops. Climate change must be dealt with, and we are going to hold the politicians to account. When real people of all generations, all backgrounds turn around and say, this is important, please listen, I think it's incredibly powerful.
For the sake of your children, for the sake of your grandchildren, for the sake of life and this beautiful living planet, I ask you to stand on the right side of history.